Let's see if he can make it back. They laughed and drove away. I never came back. 15 years later, they found me. Orned 27 missed calls. That summer I turned 53 was supposed to be like any other. Working at my construction company, dealing with chronic back pain that made every morning feel like climbing Mount Everest, and being the eternal disappointment to my golden child son, Garrett. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we sure as hell weren't the type who took vacations to fancy resorts. So when Garrett announced we were taking a family road trip to his cousin's graduation ceremony in Nevada, I should have known something was brewing. You see, I need to explain about my family dynamics here. Garrett wasn't just your standard ungrateful son. He was the type who'd borrowed $43,000 from me over the years for his business ventures that never panned out, who'd moved back home at 28 with his girlfriend Mackenzie and their twin toddlers, and who'd been treating me like his personal ATM since he could spell money. My wife Diane would occasionally mumble weak protests when things got too heated, but we all knew it was just for show. Look, I get it, I wasn't father of the year. After Diane's first miscarriage, something broke inside me. I started drinking more, working longer hours, saying things I shouldn't have said, but I never abandoned my responsibilities. I kept a roof over their heads, food on the table, and clothes on their backs. When Garrett wanted to play baseball in high school, who do you think paid for all that equipment? When he crashed his first car at 17, who covered the insurance deductible? When Mackenzie got pregnant and they needed somewhere to live, whose door stayed open? 3 days into that nightmare road trip, I was already regretting not making up some excuse to stay home. Garrett and Mackenzie had been taking turns with their favorite game, making Dad's life miserable. Every pit stop became an opportunity to joke about my age, my weight, my failing business. Diane would occasionally say, "That's enough," in that voice of hers that carried about as much authority as a whisper in a hurricane. That morning, we stopped at some godforsaken rest area in Nevada, middle of absolutely nowhere for miles. Just desert, mountains shimmering in the distance, and a sad little building with bathrooms that looked like they hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. I'd been cramped in the passenger seat of Garrett's Honda Pilot, my knees practically touching my chin because Mackenzie needed the front seat for her motion sickness. I remember exactly what I was wearing: a faded blue Carhartt t-shirt, dark jeans with paint stains from last week's job, and those steel-toed boots that had seen better decades. I didn't take my phone because it was plugged into Garrett's charger in the console. Didn't take my wallet because, hell, we were in the middle of the Nevada desert and I was just using the restroom. 15 minutes. That's how long I was in that godforsaken bathroom, fighting with a soap dispenser that seemed determined to give me exactly one drop of liquid at a time. When I walked out, squinting against the brutal Nevada sun, our spot in the parking lot was empty. The dark blue Honda Pilot was gone. At first, I thought they'd moved the car. Maybe Garrett decided to park closer to the vending machines, or maybe Mackenzie wanted shade. I walked around the entire rest area, all 50 yards of it. Nothing. That's when the cold realization started creeping up my spine like ice water. The thing about betrayal from your own blood is that it hits different than any other kind of pain. It's not sharp and quick like a broken bone. It's slow and deep, like poison working its way through your system, making you question everything you thought you knew about the world. I waited an hour, sitting on a concrete bench that was still radiating heat from the morning sun, telling myself this was just Garrett's idea of a prank. That any minute now, that Honda would come rolling back around the corner and they'd all be laughing about how scared I looked. People came and went, a family with 3 kids who were fighting over a bag of chips, an elderly couple walking their ancient beagle, a trucker who asked if I needed help. "Just waiting for my family," I told him. "They'll be back." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Even strangers could smell desperation from a mile away. After hour 2, that cold feeling in my gut transformed into something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. A lifetime of memories started flooding back, but not the good ones. Every time Garrett had borrowed money and forgotten to pay it back. Every holiday dinner where he'd made snide comments about my work clothes while wearing the expensive jacket I'd bought him. Every time Diane had sided with him when we argued, like I was the unreasonable one for expecting basic respect in my own house. I could almost hear their voices as they drove away. Garrett's voice. Bet the old man's freaking out right now. Mackenzie, always eager to join in. Maybe this will teach him not to be so controlling. Diane's weak protest that wouldn't actually change anything. Maybe we should go back. My first instinct was to find a phone, call them, beg them to come back. But as I stood up to approach a young mother who was wrestling with a diaper bag and a screaming baby, something stopped me. Something Banks, my own father, had told me when I was about 12 years old. Son, people will treat you exactly how you let them treat you. Banks had been a hard man, not given to displays of affection or emotion, but he'd never once made me question whether he'd be there when I needed him. He'd worked double shifts at the lumber mill to pay for my sports equipment, never missed a game, taught me how to swing a hammer and read a blueprint. When I graduated high school, he'd shaken my hand and said, "You're a man now. Act like one." So I made a decision. I approached that young mother and asked if I could borrow her phone. But I didn't call my family. Instead, I called information and got the number for the local sheriff's department. I figured if they were going to abandon me, I'd at least make sure someone knew where I was in case they came looking later, which, deep down, I knew they wouldn't. The dispatcher was kind but confused. "Sir, you're saying your family left you at a rest stop?" "Ma'am, I'm saying my family decided to continue their vacation without me. I just need to know what my options are for getting somewhere with civilization." She transferred me to a deputy who happened to be familiar with the area. Nearest town with bus service is Battle Mountain, about 60 miles north. You could try hitchhiking, but I wouldn't recommend it. This time of year, temperatures hit 110 degrees by afternoon. That's when the young mother with the screaming baby surprised me. She'd been listening to my conversation, and when I hung up, she said, "I'm headed through Battle Mountain on my way to Reno if you need a ride." Her name was Jessica, and she had that kind of tired kindness that only comes from being a parent. Her baby, Connor, was teething and miserable, but she still took pity on a stranger stranded in the desert. During the drive, she told me about her divorce, how her ex-husband had cleaned out their bank account and disappeared, leaving her to figure out how to make ends meet. "Family can hurt you worse than anybody," she said, adjusting the rearview mirror to check on Connor, "because they know exactly where to aim." That first night in Battle Mountain, I stayed at the Desert Inn, a motel that had seen better decades but was clean and cheap. I had my credit cards, thank God, because Garrett hadn't thought to steal my wallet, just abandoned me without it. I sat on the edge of that sagging mattress staring at the phone, fighting every instinct I'd developed over 53 years. I wanted to call Diane, wanted to hear her voice telling me it was all a misunderstanding, that they were frantically looking for me. But every time I reached for the phone, I remembered something else. The way she'd laughed along with Garrett's jokes about my dad bod. The way she'd never once defended me when he'd called me a failure. The way she'd moved into the guest bedroom 6 months ago, claiming my snoring was keeping her awake. Instead, I called my insurance company to report my situation. In case something happened to me, I wanted there to be a record. I called my foreman, Jimmy, to let him know I'd be out for a few days. I called the bank to put a hold on any joint account activities. "Everything okay, Mr. Richardson?" Jimmy asked. He'd worked for my company for 8 years, ever since I'd pulled him out of a bar fight and offered him a job instead of pressing charges. "Family emergency," I said. "I'll be in touch." 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized Diane's voice immediately, shaking with what sounded like panic. "Wesley, where are you? We've been looking everywhere. The police won't help because you're an adult, but we know something terrible must have happened. This was just supposed to be a joke, honey. Garrett said you'd figure out how to get to Uncle Raymond's house on your own. Show us how tough you are. We waited at the next gas station for over an hour, but when you didn't show up, we came back and couldn't find you." I listened to her ramble, her voice getting higher and more frantic. In the background, I could hear Garrett saying something about calling the FBI, about how I was probably dead in a ditch somewhere. Mackenzie was crying, or at least making crying noises. "Wesley, say something. We've been worried sick. Garrett feels terrible. He never meant for this to happen." That cold feeling in my gut was gone now. In its place was something I'd never felt before when dealing with my family: complete and utter calm. "You wanted to see if I could make it on my own," I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been when talking to them. "So watch me." I hung up and immediately blocked the number. Then I went to Verizon and changed my number completely. 27 missed calls came to my old number before it was disconnected. I imagined them getting progressively more desperate, then angry, then resigned. I never responded to a single one. Within a week, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going home. Why would I? To a house where I paid all the bills but had no authority. To a wife who'd been emotionally checked out for years. To a son who saw me as nothing more than a source of funding for his latest scheme. Battle Mountain wasn't much to look at, but it had something Las Vegas didn't: possibility. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone, but big enough that a man could start over without too many questions. There was a construction company that needed someone with experience, a small apartment above the hardware store that came furnished, and a diner called Mountain View, where the coffee was strong and the pie was homemade. That first month was harder than I want to admit. Some nights I'd lie awake in that little apartment, listening to the freight trains that came through every few hours and wonder if I'd lost my mind. I'd spent 30 years building a life in Las Vegas, and I'd walked away from it because my son decided to play a prank that went too far. But every morning I'd wake up without the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. No Garrett banging on my door asking for money. No Mackenzie leaving dirty dishes in my sink while complaining about how I loaded the dishwasher. No Diane's cold silence that somehow managed to be louder than screaming. The construction job was with a company called Silver State Builders, run by a man named Dale Morrison, who'd moved to Nevada from Montana 20 years earlier. He was my age, divorced, with grown kids who actually called him on Sundays. When I showed up asking for work, he looked at my hands, the permanent stains under my nails, the calluses that told their own story, and said, "When can you start?" I told him I could start immediately, that I'd left my previous situation abruptly due to family issues. "Family," he said, shaking his head. "They can be worse than enemies sometimes, because at least you expect enemies to stab you in the back." Dale became the first real friend I'd made in decades. We worked well together, shared the same philosophy about doing things right the first time, had the same tolerance for lazy workers, which was zero. After a few months, he started talking about taking on bigger projects, maybe bidding on some commercial work in Reno. "I could use a partner," he said one afternoon as we were cleaning up a job site. "Someone who knows what he's doing and won't try to cheat me blind." I'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. We shook hands on it right there, covered in sawdust and paint fumes, and suddenly I wasn't just Wesley Richardson, abandoned father. I was Wesley Richardson, business owner. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on my old life through social media. It's amazing what people will post online without thinking about privacy settings. Garrett's Facebook was a goldmine of information, most of it confirming what I already suspected about his character. Within 3 months of abandoning me, he'd posted pictures of a new truck, a lifted Ford F-250 that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. The same month, Diane had posted a cryptic status about financial stress and unexpected expenses. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Garrett had convinced her to co-sign for something expensive while I wasn't there to object. 6 months after Nevada, Mackenzie left him. Her Facebook relationship status changed from engaged to it's complicated to single within a week. She moved back to California with the twins, and suddenly Garrett's post became a lot angrier, a lot more focused on how women don't understand loyalty, and how some people can't handle a real man. Dale and I landed our first big commercial contract that winter, renovating a medical office complex in Elko. It was the kind of job I'd dreamed about back in Vegas, but never had the capital or connections to pursue. The work was challenging, the timeline was tight, but we pulled it off on time and under budget. "You know," Dale said as we watched the final inspection, "I haven't felt this good about work in years. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not constantly looking over your shoulder waiting for someone to screw you over." I knew exactly what he meant. Year 2 in Battle Mountain brought changes I hadn't expected. I'd lost 30 pounds without trying, partly from the physical work, partly from not stress-eating my way through family dinners where I was constantly on edge. I'd started sleeping better, waking up before my alarm instead of hitting snooze 3 times. I'd even started reading again, something I hadn't done since college. More importantly, I'd started dating. Her name was Patricia, and she worked at the county courthouse. Divorced, kids grown, and living in other states with the kind of no-nonsense attitude that comes from dealing with deadbeat dads and custody battles all day. She was 5 years younger than me, with silver-streaked auburn hair and laugh lines that suggested she'd found plenty to smile about, despite whatever hardships life had thrown her way. Our first date was coffee at Mountain View Diner, and I was more nervous than I'd been since high school. I kept waiting for her to ask about my family, about why a 54-year-old man had moved to Battle Mountain without any local connections. Instead, she told me about her work, her hobbies. She made jewelry and sold it at craft fairs, her plans to visit her daughter in Oregon the following month. "What about you?" she asked. "Kids?" I'd rehearsed this answer. "I have a son in Las Vegas. We're not close." She nodded like this was perfectly normal, which I guess it was. "Family's complicated," she said. "I have a brother I haven't spoken to in 5 years. Sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst." 6 months later, she moved in with me. We got a bigger place, a small house on the edge of town with a yard where Patricia could plant the garden she'd been dreaming about. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, built on mutual respect and shared goals instead of obligations and guilt. Meanwhile, my old life was imploding in ways I could never have predicted. Through my fake Facebook accounts, I'd created several by then, just to keep tabs on the situation, I watched the slow-motion disaster unfold. Diane had returned to work after 25 years as a homemaker. She'd gotten a job at a department store, which couldn't have been easy at her age. Her posts were a mixture of inspirational quotes about new beginnings and thinly veiled complaints about sore feet and difficult customers. Garrett had moved back in with her after Mackenzie left. His truck got repossessed 3 months later, which he blamed on predatory lending practices, rather than his failure to make payments. The business ventures became increasingly desperate, something involving cryptocurrency, then multi-level marketing, then a scheme to flip houses with no money down. But it was the post from Diane's sister that really caught my attention. "Pray for my sister as she goes through some health challenges. She's too proud to ask for help, but the medical bills are piling up. Cervical cancer. Stage 2. Caught early, good prognosis, but the treatment was expensive and their insurance was apparently inadequate. The details came out slowly through various family members' posts and comments. Surgery, radiation, medications that cost more than most people's rent. I found myself staring at those posts for a long time, fighting feelings I didn't want to have. Diane and I had been married for 28 years. We'd lost 2 babies to miscarriage, celebrated Garrett's first steps together, held each other through the death of both our parents. There had been good years, really good years, before everything started falling apart. Patricia found me at my computer one evening scrolling through updates about Diane's treatment. "You're thinking about going back," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said quickly. "I'm not. It's complicated." She sat down next to me, looked at the screen. "That's your wife." "Ex-wife. Technically, we never actually divorced, but she's sick and you still care about her." I closed the laptop. "They abandoned me in the desert, Patricia. They drove away and left me like a piece of garbage. I know, you told me, but that doesn't mean you stopped loving her. That's the thing about finding someone truly worth loving. They don't try to change you, but they help you see yourself more clearly. Patricia wasn't threatened by my feelings about Diane because she understood something I was still learning. Love doesn't just disappear because someone hurts you. Sometimes it transforms into something else: pity, regret, a dull ache for what might have been. But it doesn't just vanish. I didn't go back to Vegas, but I did something I thought I'd never do. I sent money. Not to Garrett and not directly to Diane. I contacted the hospital where she was receiving treatment, spoke to their financial assistance department, and arranged to pay off her outstanding balance. $22,000. More money than I would have been able to spare back when I was supporting 4 adults on one income, but manageable now that Dale and I were seeing consistent profit from the business. I used my middle name and Patricia's last name on the paperwork, so it wouldn't be immediately obvious where the payment came from. Let them think it was insurance reimbursement or charity care. I didn't want gratitude or reconciliation. I just wanted to be able to look at myself in the mirror. The explosion on social media was immediate and confused. Diane posted about miracles and answered prayers. Garrett was suspicious, posting vague comments about mysterious benefactors and wondering who had that kind of money to throw around. Various family members speculated about wealthy relatives or secret savings accounts. I watched the detective work unfold with dark amusement. They knew someone had paid the bills, but they couldn't figure out who. Garrett even posted a plea for his anonymous angel to come forward so they could properly say thank you. Not a chance in hell. Year 3 brought expansion. Dale and I took on 2 employees, bought better equipment, started bidding on projects throughout northern Nevada. I was making more money than I ever had in Vegas, and more importantly, I was enjoying the work again. There's something to be said for being truly appreciated by your business partner and employees, instead of taken for granted by people who see you as an ATM. Patricia and I talked about marriage occasionally, but neither of us felt the need to rush into anything. We were both old enough to know that a piece of paper doesn't guarantee happiness, and young enough to believe that we had plenty of time to figure things out. But life has a way of forcing decisions when you least expect them. It started with a phone call to the office. Dale answered, then handed me the phone with a confused expression. "Some guy says he's your son, says it's an emergency." I took the phone, already knowing this wouldn't end well. "Dad?" Garrett's voice sounded different, smaller somehow. "Dad, it's me." I said nothing. "Look, I know things got messed up, but I need help. Mom needs help." "I'm listening." The cancer came back. It's spread. The doctors are talking about experimental treatments, but insurance won't cover them. And there's other stuff, financial stuff that got complicated while she was sick the first time. "The house?" "What about the house?" "It's in foreclosure. I tried to help, but my credit is shot and the mortgage company won't work with us. We've got maybe 6 weeks before they kick us out." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 30 years pressing down on me. "What do you want from me, Garrett?" Could you come home? Could we talk about this in person? I know I screwed up, but she's dying, Dad. And I don't know what to do." There it was. The call I'd been expecting and dreading for 3 years. Part of me, the part that still remembered holding Garrett when he was 6 and had nightmares. The part that had loved Diane when she was 25 and still believed in happy endings, wanted to get in my truck and drive straight to Vegas. But I'd learned something in my years in Nevada. Just because someone is drowning doesn't mean you have to jump in the water with them. "I'm sorry about your mother," I said. "I'm sorry about the house, but I'm not coming back. Dad, please. I know what I did was wrong, but..." "You didn't just do something wrong, Garrett. You abandoned your father in the desert. You drove away laughing while I stood there trying to figure out how to survive. You want to know why I'm not coming home? Because I finally learned that home isn't where people tolerate you. It's where people value you. So that's it? You're just going to let Mom lose everything? Your mother made her choice 3 years ago. She chose you over me, chose to enable your behavior instead of holding you accountable. Those choices have consequences. She was scared. You were always so angry, so controlling. Garrett. My voice cut through his excuses like a blade. I spent 30 years providing for a family that treated me like a servant. I worked 60-hour weeks so you could play sports and go to college. I emptied my savings account 13 different times to bail you out of your own mistakes. And when I needed you most, when I was stranded and vulnerable, you drove away laughing. Silence on the other end. But here's what you don't understand, I continued. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. You did me the biggest favor of my life by showing me exactly how little I meant to all of you. It freed me to build something better. So you won't help at all? I thought about the hospital bill I'd already paid, about the anonymous contribution that had probably bought Diane several extra months of treatment. But I didn't mention it. I already helped more than you'll ever know, but my obligation to support your poor decisions ended the day you left me at that rest stop. I hung up before he could respond. Patricia found me sitting on our back porch that evening, staring at the sunset over the mountains. Bad call? Diane's cancer is back. They're losing the house. She sat down next to me, took my hand. And you feel guilty. I feel tired. Tired of carrying guilt that isn't mine to carry. So what are you going to do? Nothing. I'm going to sit here with the woman I love, in the life I built from nothing, and remind myself that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is let them face the consequences of their choices. She squeezed my hand. You're a good man, Wesley Richardson. I'm trying to be. That phone call from Garrett was 3 years ago, but the story doesn't end there. In fact, the most dramatic chapter was yet to come. 2 months after I hung up on Garrett, I got a call that nearly shattered the peace I'd worked so hard to build. It was from Detective Maria Santos of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Mr. Richardson, I'm calling about your son, Garrett Richardson. He's been arrested in connection with a fraud investigation. My blood went cold. What kind of fraud? Elder financial abuse. Multiple victims, sir. We found your contact information listed as his emergency contact in some old records. Are you available to come in for questioning? I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, Patricia looking up from her book with concern. I haven't spoken to my son in months, Detective. And I live in Nevada now. Sir, with respect, Las Vegas is in Nevada. Battle Mountain, Nevada, about 300 miles north. I've been here for over 3 years. There was a pause. Mr. Richardson, your son has been telling his victims that his father owns a successful construction company and would guarantee any loans they made to him. Several elderly people have lost their life savings. The room started spinning. How much money are we talking about? Over $400,000, sir, and he's been using your name and business reputation as collateral. That night was the longest of my life since those first few days at the rest stop. Patricia held me while I processed what this meant. Garrett hadn't just abandoned me in the desert. He'd been using my name to steal from vulnerable people. The construction business I'd spent 3 years building, the reputation Dale and I had worked so hard to establish, could be destroyed by association. We have to fight this, Patricia said. We have to prove you weren't involved. The next morning, I called the best criminal defense attorney in Reno. Marcus Waverly looked like he belonged in a movie. Expensive suit, silver hair, the kind of confidence that costs $500 an hour. But he was worth every penny. Your son was clever, he admitted after reviewing the police reports. He never forged your signature or claimed you were directly involved. He just implied. Told people you were successful, showed them newspaper articles about Silver State builders, suggested that your business could cover his debts if necessary. But I wasn't involved at all. I believe you, Mr. Richardson. But proving your ignorance might be more complicated than you think. We need to demonstrate a clear timeline of when you left Las Vegas, why you left, and why you haven't been in contact with your family. That's when things got interesting. To prove I wasn't involved in Garrett's schemes, I had to tell the complete story of my abandonment. I had to provide evidence that I'd been estranged from my family, which meant giving the police access to my phone records, bank statements, employment history, even testimony from people in Battle Mountain who could vouch for my character. Dale was furious when he learned what was happening. "That little bastard could destroy everything we've built," he said, pacing around our office. 20 years I've been building this company's reputation, and your son might tank it in 6 months. But Dale surprised me. Instead of cutting ties or asking me to step back from the business, he hired his own attorney and started documenting every aspect of our partnership, every decision I'd made, every client interaction I'd had. He was building a case to protect not just me, but our entire company. The investigation took 8 months. 8 months of depositions, interviews, financial audits, and media attention I never wanted. The local papers picked up the story. Battle Mountain businessman denies involvement in son's fraud scheme. And suddenly everyone in our small town knew our business. Some people were supportive. The waitresses at Mountain View Diner would slip me extra pie when I came in for coffee. The hardware store owner, Bill, told anyone who'd listen that I was good people, and that anyone who thought otherwise could take their business elsewhere. But others weren't so kind. I could feel the stares when I walked down Main Street, hear the whispered conversations that stopped when I got too close. A few potential clients canceled contracts, citing concerns about ongoing legal issues. The worst part was watching Patricia deal with the stress. She'd moved to Battle Mountain for peace and quiet, not to become the wife of someone embroiled in a criminal investigation. Some nights I'd catch her staring out the window with that 1,000-yard stare that comes from worrying about things beyond your control. "I'm sorry," I told her one evening after a particularly brutal day of testimony. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this." She turned to me with fire in her eyes. "Wesley Richardson, if you apologize for your son's actions one more time, I'm going to throw my coffee mug at your head. You didn't choose this, you didn't cause this, and you're sure as hell not going to let him destroy what we've built." The trial was a circus. Garrett had aged badly in the 3 years since our last phone call. His hair was thinning. His face had that puffy look that comes from too much stress and too much drinking. When he saw me in the courtroom gallery, his expression went through several emotions: surprise, hope, anger, and finally resignation. His attorney tried to paint him as a desperate son trying to save his dying mother, suggesting that his father's abandonment had driven him to increasingly desperate measures. It was a sympathy play that might have worked if the victims hadn't been so sympathetic themselves. 78-year-old Margaret Chen had lost her entire retirement savings, $127,000 that she'd intended to leave to her grandchildren. 82-year-old Robert Willis had mortgaged his paid-off house based on Garrett's promises and was now facing foreclosure. The stories went on, each one more heartbreaking than the last. When I was called to testify, I told the truth. The whole truth. About the abandonment at the rest stop, about the 3 years of silence, about building a new life 300 miles away. The prosecutor asked me to describe my last conversation with Garrett, and I repeated it word for word. "So when your son asked for help with his mother's medical bills, you refused?" the defense attorney asked during cross-examination. "I refused to return to a family that had made it clear I wasn't valued or wanted," I said. "But I didn't refuse to help with medical bills." That's when I dropped the bomb that even my own attorney hadn't expected. I told the court about the anonymous payment I'd made to the hospital, about the $22,000 I'd quietly contributed to Diane's cancer treatment. The courtroom was silent. Garrett's face went white. Even his attorney seemed stunned. "You paid your ex-wife's medical bills anonymously while refusing to speak to your family?" the prosecutor asked. "I paid them because it was the right thing to do. But I didn't tell them because I didn't want gratitude or reconciliation. I just wanted her to get the treatment she needed." The jury convicted Garrett on all counts: elder financial abuse, fraud, identity theft, 15 felony counts total. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison, with possibility of parole in 8. As the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, Garrett turned and looked at me one last time. His lips moved, and I could just make out what he was saying. "I'm sorry, Dad." I nodded once. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever heard from him, and it only took a criminal conviction to get there. The aftermath of the trial was almost as difficult as the investigation. Several of Garrett's victims sued me personally, despite the criminal courts finding that I wasn't involved. The civil cases dragged on for another year, eating up legal fees and casting a shadow over our business that seemed to follow us everywhere. But something interesting happened during that time. The people who mattered, our employees, our regular clients, our friends in Battle Mountain, rallied around us in ways I never expected. Dale and I received letters of support from contractors we'd worked with, from clients whose projects we'd completed on time and under budget, from suppliers who'd trusted us with credit lines and been paid promptly every month. The local newspaper ran an editorial titled "Character Matters" that praised our handling of the situation and criticized those who would judge a man by his son's crimes rather than his own actions. Bill from the hardware store started wearing a t-shirt that said "Team Wesley" whenever he saw protesters outside our office. Yes, there were actually protesters, mostly family members of Garrett's victims who couldn't understand how I could be innocent. Patricia surprised me again during this time. Instead of shrinking away from the attention, she became fiercely protective of our reputation. She started a letter-writing campaign to local businesses, organized character witnesses for the civil trials, and even gave an interview to the regional newspaper where she laid out the timeline of our relationship and my estrangement from my family. "My husband," she told the reporter, "is the most honorable man I've ever known. The fact that his son chose crime over character says nothing about Wesley, and everything about the kind of person who would abandon his own father in the desert." That interview was reprinted in papers throughout Nevada, and even picked up by a few national outlets. Suddenly, instead of being the father of the con man, I was being portrayed as another one of Garrett's victims. The civil suits were eventually settled for much less than the plaintiffs had demanded. Marcus Waverly had built an ironclad case proving my estrangement from the family, and the anonymous hospital payment actually worked in my favor. It showed that I was capable of helping family members when I chose to, which made it clear that my distance from Garrett was intentional and justified. During this entire ordeal, Dale and I discovered something about our business that we hadn't realized. We'd built something strong enough to survive a crisis. Not only did Silver State Builders weather the storm, but we emerged from it with a reputation for integrity that attracted new clients who specifically wanted to work with a company that had been tested and proven trustworthy. The young guys on our crew, Tommy, Jake, Luis, and David, became fiercely loyal during the trial period. They'd heard all the gossip, read all the newspaper articles, and still showed up every day ready to work. Tommy even got into a bar fight with some guy who was running his mouth about me being a criminal sympathizer. I had to bail him out of jail, but I also gave him a raise. "Boss," he said as we were driving home from the courthouse, "my dad walked out on us when I was 12. Never looked back, never sent money, never called on birthdays. But you got screwed over by your family and still managed to help people, build a business, treat your employees right. That tells me everything I need to know about character." 3 years after Garrett's conviction, life finally started to feel normal again. The legal bills were paid off, the business was stronger than ever, and Patricia and I were talking about taking a real vacation, maybe to Hawaii, somewhere completely removed from Nevada desert and family drama. That's when I got the letter. It came to the office, addressed to me personally in handwriting I recognized despite not having seen it in over 6 years. The return address was Nevada State Prison, and the letter was from Garrett. I stared at that envelope for 3 days before opening it. Patricia found me sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., turning it over and over in my hands like it might explode. "You have to read it," she said gently. "You'll never have peace if you don't know what it says." The letter was 4 pages long, handwritten on prison stationery. Garrett's handwriting had always been messy, but prison seemed to have made it worse, or maybe his hands were shaking when he wrote it. "Dad," it began. "I don't know if you'll read this, but I had to try. I've been in therapy here working with a counselor who specializes in addiction and family issues. Yes, addiction. Gambling, specifically. That's how this all started. I know you probably think I'm just making excuses, but I want you to understand how everything went so wrong. After you left, Mom got sicker faster than we expected. The bills were piling up faster than we could handle, and the house was already in trouble because I'd been using it as collateral for business loans that went bad. I started going to the casinos to try to make quick money. Just small amounts at first, but you know how that goes. I'd win a little, lose a lot more, convince myself the next big win was just around the corner. By the time Mom died, I owed money to some very dangerous people. That's when I started the thing with the elderly folks. I told myself it was just borrowing, that I'd pay them back as soon as I hit it big. I used your name because I knew they'd trust a successful businessman, and because part of me still believed you'd come back and fix everything like you always did when I was a kid. I know that's not fair. I know I had no right to drag your name into my mess. I know I destroyed people's lives, including yours. The counselor says I was so used to you bailing me out that I couldn't imagine a world where you wouldn't eventually show up to make everything right. But here's what I figured out in therapy, Dad. You were right to leave. Not just that day at the rest stop, but all of it. You were right to cut us off, right to build your own life, right to refuse to enable my bad choices anymore. I spent so many years angry at you for abandoning us that I never stopped to think about how we'd been abandoning you emotionally for years. Mom used to say you were too hard on me, too demanding, too controlling. What I realize now is that you were trying to teach me to be responsible, and we kept undermining you. Every time you set a boundary, Mom would help me get around it. Every time you tried to hold me accountable, she'd make excuses for me. We turned you into the bad guy for having standards. I'm not writing this letter to ask for anything. I know I can't undo the damage I caused to those people, to your reputation, to our family. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to take responsibility for my actions without expecting forgiveness or reconciliation. So that's what I'm doing. I ruined your good name. I stole from vulnerable people. I destroyed families and retirement plans and dreams. I did all of that, not because you abandoned me, but because I never learned to accept consequences for my actions. Because every time life got hard, I expected someone else to fix it for me. I heard about the hospital bill, about how you paid for Mom's treatment without telling anyone. That's the kind of man you are. You do the right thing even when no one's watching, even when the people you're helping have hurt you. I wish I'd learned that from you instead of learning how to make excuses. I've got at least 5 more years in here, probably longer. I'm using the time to get my GED, take some college courses, work in the prison library. I'm trying to become the kind of person you could have been proud of, even though I know it's probably too late for that. If you throw this letter away, without finishing it, I understand. If you never want to hear from me again, I understand that too. But I needed you to know that I finally get it. You weren't the problem in our family. You were the only one trying to hold it together while the rest of us pulled it apart. I love you, Dad. I probably never said that enough when I had the chance. Your son, Garrett. I read that letter 5 times before Patricia got home from work. When she found me in the kitchen, the pages spread out in front of me. She could tell immediately that everything had changed. What did he say? I handed her the letter and watched her face as she read it. Patricia had never met Garrett, but she'd lived through the aftermath of his crimes with me. She'd seen what his choices had cost not just his victims, but everyone who cared about me. Well, she said finally, setting the letter down carefully. That's not what I expected. What do you think I should do? I think, she said, taking my hand, that's entirely up to you. But I also think that letter took a lot of courage to write, and it might have taken even more courage to write it without asking for anything in return. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to Dale, who was surprisingly philosophical about the whole thing. I talked to Marcus Waverly, who reminded me that I had no legal obligation to respond. I even talked to Margaret Chen, the elderly victim who had testified so powerfully at Garrett's trial. Mr. Richardson, she said when I called her, my grandson is about your son's age. He's never stolen from anyone or hurt anybody, but he's made some pretty big mistakes in his life. The difference is, he had family who held him accountable and helped him learn from those mistakes. Your son never had that. He had me trying to teach him responsibility for 28 years. No, sir. With respect, he had you trying to teach him responsibility while other people were teaching him that rules don't apply to him. That's not the same thing. 3 weeks after receiving the letter, I wrote back. Not a long letter, just 2 pages. I told Garrett that I appreciated his honesty and his acceptance of responsibility. I told him that I was proud of him for getting his GED and working in the prison library. I told him that while I couldn't forget the damage he'd caused, I was willing to see what kind of man he became during his incarceration. I didn't promise visits or phone calls or any kind of relationship, but I left the door open just a crack. He wrote back immediately, a shorter letter thanking me for responding and promising not to expect more than I was willing to give. He told me about his prison job, his college courses, his plans for when he got out. He asked about my business, about Patricia, about whether I was happy. We've been corresponding for 6 months now. Nothing dramatic, nothing earth-shaking. Just 2 men trying to figure out what a relationship looks like when it's built on honesty instead of obligation. Patricia reads all the letters. I asked her to, because I need someone I trust to help me recognize if I'm being manipulated again. So far, she thinks Garrett's changes are genuine. People can change, she told me after reading his latest letter, where he wrote about tutoring other inmates for their GEDs. Not everyone does, but some people can learn from their mistakes if the consequences are severe enough. I don't know if Garrett and I will ever have anything resembling a normal father-son relationship. Too much damage has been done, too many years have passed, but maybe we can have something different, something based on mutual respect instead of resentment, on chosen connection instead of forced family ties. In that time, Dale and I have grown our business to 12 employees and taken on projects throughout Nevada and into California. We're bidding on a major commercial complex in Carson City that could be our biggest project ever. Patricia and I got married last spring in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with Dale as my best man and Patricia's daughter flying in from Oregon to stand with her mother. I still keep tabs on my old life occasionally, though the updates have become sparse. Diane passed away 14 months after Garrett's phone call. I saw the obituary online, written by someone who clearly didn't know her well. All generic platitudes about her loving spirit and devotion to family. The funeral was small, held at the same church where we'd been married 31 years earlier. I didn't attend, but I sent flowers, a simple arrangement with a card that said, "Rest in peace, Diane." I signed it with just my initials, but I think she would have known. Garrett has disappeared from social media almost entirely. The last post I saw was 2 years ago, a rambling rant about how some people abandon their family when times get tough, and how real men don't run away from their responsibilities. I almost laughed at the irony, but mostly I felt sorry for him. He'll probably never understand that I didn't abandon my family. I escaped from people who had been abandoning me emotionally for years. The house in Vegas sold at auction for about 60% of what it was worth. I know this because I still get credit monitoring alerts. Apparently, we never removed my name from the mortgage when I left, which means Diane's default affected my credit score. Patricia laughed when I showed her the notification. "Even in death, they're still costing you money," she said. But she was wrong about that. They're not costing me anything anymore, because I finally learned the most important lesson of my adult life. You can't make people love you, but you can stop letting them hurt you. Last month, I got a LinkedIn notification that someone had been looking at my profile repeatedly. Some name I didn't recognize, but when I clicked on it, I saw enough details to realize it was probably Garrett using a fake account. Apparently, Silver State Builders has a decent online presence now, and a simple Google search would show him that his old man isn't just surviving, he's thriving. Part of me wonders if he'll try to make contact again, especially now that he knows I've done well for myself. But I'm not the same man who sat at that rest stop 15 years ago, afraid and abandoned. I'm not the man who spent 30 years walking on eggshells in his own home, desperate for approval from people who saw him as a walking ATM. I'm Wesley Richardson, co-owner of Silver State Builders. Husband to Patricia, who thinks I'm worth loving just as I am. Friend to Dale, who trusts me with his livelihood and treats me like the partner I am. Mentor to the young guys we've hired, who actually listen when I teach them how to read blueprints and handle power tools safely. Most importantly, I'm a man who learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's what you build after they're gone from your life. The most surprising development came last month. We'd landed the Carson City contract, a $2.3 million project that would be our biggest ever. Dale and I were celebrating at Mountain View Diner when Bill from the hardware store came over to our table with a huge grin on his face. "You boys seen the news?" he asked, waving a copy of the Nevada Business Journal. There, on the front page, was a photo of Dale and me shaking hands with the Carson City project manager. The headline read, "Battle Mountain Success Story. Silver State Builders lands major contract despite past challenges." The article detailed our company's growth, mentioned the legal challenges we'd overcome, and painted us as an example of how integrity and hard work could triumph over adversity. But it was the final paragraph that really got to me. When asked about the secret to their success, Richardson credited his business partner and the support of the Battle Mountain community. "Sometimes," he said, "the people who hurt you the most end up giving you the greatest gift, the chance to discover who you really are when you're free to be yourself." I didn't remember saying exactly those words to the reporter, but they captured something true about my journey. That night, Patricia and I drove out to the overlook above town, the same spot where we'd had our first real conversation about my past. "You know what I realized today?" she said, looking out over the lights of our small town. "You didn't just build a business these past few years. You built a reputation. You built relationships. You built a life that matters to people." She was right. During the legal troubles, I'd seen exactly who would stand by me when things got tough. Dale, who could have cut me loose to protect his own interests. Tommy and the crew, who could have found jobs with competitors who weren't dealing with scandal. Bill and the other local business owners who could have distanced themselves from the controversy. Instead, they'd all chosen to support me based on their direct experience of my character, not on gossip or assumptions or family connections. "There's something else," Patricia said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "This came to the house today." The return address was from a law firm in Las Vegas. My first thought was that someone else was suing me, that there was some aspect of Garrett's crimes I'd missed. But when I opened it, it was something completely different. It was a letter from Margaret Chen's attorney, but not about a lawsuit. She was writing to let me know that she'd included a provision in her will leaving $5,000 to Silver State Builders Scholarship Fund. "What scholarship fund?" I asked Patricia. "The one we're going to start," she said with a smile. "For kids from troubled families who want to learn trades. Margaret called me last week with the idea. She said young people need to see examples of how to build something good from a bad situation." That's how the Silver State Builders Scholarship Fund was born. We started with Margaret's $5,000 donation and added $10,000 of our own. Local businesses contributed materials and tools. The community college created a program where scholarship recipients could learn construction trades while earning general education credits. Our first scholarship recipient was a 19-year-old named Alex, whose father had been in and out of prison his whole childhood. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and Alex had been heading toward trouble himself until a high school counselor steered him toward our program. "Mr. Richardson," he said the day we announced his scholarship, "I know what it's like when your dad lets you down, but seeing what you built after your family situation, it gives me hope that I can make something good out of my life too." That conversation stayed with me for weeks. Here was a kid who understood exactly what I'd been through, who saw possibility instead of just pain in my story. It made me realize that my experience, as difficult as it had been, could actually help other people facing similar challenges. The scholarship fund grew into something bigger than any of us had imagined. Local high schools started referring students to us. The Nevada Department of Education recognized our program as a model for other rural communities. We even got a visit from a state legislator who was working on expanded funding for trade education programs. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Garrett had heard about the scholarship fund through other inmates who read about it in newspapers that made their way into the prison library. His next letter was different from all the others. "Dad, I saw the article about the scholarship fund, about how you're helping kids who come from messed up families learn to build something good. I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about that a lot. There's a guy in here, Marcus, who's about 22. He's in for drug dealing, but he's been clean for 2 years now and he's working on his GED. He reminds me of myself at that age, except he's actually learning from his mistakes instead of making excuses for them. I've been tutoring him in math, and yesterday he asked me about you, about how you managed to start over after everything fell apart. I told him about the rest stop, about how you built your business from nothing, about how you proved that being a good person matters more than having the perfect family. He said something that really stuck with me. Your dad figured out how to be the parent he needed instead of the parent he had. I think that's exactly what you did, and now you're doing it for other people's kids too. I wanted you to know that even in here, your story is giving people hope. That includes me. I've got 2 more years before I'm eligible for parole, and I've been thinking about what kind of life I want to build when I get out. I know I can never undo the damage I caused, but maybe I can learn from your example of how to build something good, even after you've lost everything that mattered to you. I'm proud of you, Dad. I should have said that a long time ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of who you became when you were free to be yourself." Reading that letter, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the day Garrett was born. Genuine pride in my son. Not pride in his achievements or accomplishments, but pride in his growing understanding of what it means to take responsibility for your life. Patricia found me crying over that letter, the first tears I'd shed about my family situation since those early days in Battle Mountain. But these weren't tears of grief or anger. They were tears of possibility. "He's really changing," she said after reading it herself. "Maybe. Or maybe he's just getting better at saying what he thinks I want to hear." "Wesley," she said, taking my hands, "when someone shows you who they are, believe them. That goes both ways. For years, Garrett showed you he was selfish and irresponsible and manipulative. Now he's showing you something different. Maybe it's time to believe that too." 3 weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I scheduled a visit to Nevada State Prison. The drive to Carson City was 2 hours of second-guessing myself. What would I say to him? What if this was all just an elaborate manipulation? What if seeing him in person brought back all the anger and disappointment I'd worked so hard to move past? The prison visiting room was nothing like I'd imagined, more like a cafeteria than the dramatic scenes you see in movies. Garrett was already sitting at a table when I arrived, and for a moment I didn't recognize him. He'd lost at least 40 pounds. His hair was shorter and grayer, and he was wearing glasses I'd never seen before. But the biggest change was in his posture. The swagger was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Dad," he said, standing up when he saw me. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." We sat across from each other at that plastic table, and for the first few minutes, neither of us knew what to say. Finally, he spoke. "I know I hurt you. I know I hurt a lot of people. And I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all those years." "What was I trying to teach you?" "That actions have consequences. That being a man means taking responsibility for your choices. That nobody owes you anything just because you exist." He paused, taking off his glasses to clean them. "That family isn't about blood. It's about how you treat the people who count on you." We talked for 2 hours. Not about the past mostly, but about the future. About his plans for when he got out, about the college courses he was taking, about the other inmates he was helping with their GEDs. He asked about the business, about Patricia, about the scholarship fund. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said as our time was running out. And I don't expect us to have some kind of movie reunion where everything goes back to normal, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to become the kind of person who deserves a father like you. Driving home that night, I realized something important. I didn't need Garrett to change for my own peace of mind. I'd already built a good life, surrounded myself with people who valued me, created something meaningful from the ashes of my old existence. But seeing him take genuine responsibility for his actions, watching him try to build something positive even from prison, that gave me hope for him in a way I hadn't felt since he was a child. Every morning when I wake up next to Patricia, every evening when we sit on our porch watching the sun set over the mountains, every time I get a letter from one of our scholarship recipients telling me about their progress, I'm reminded that I didn't just survive being abandoned in the Nevada desert. I discovered that being abandoned was the first step toward finding myself. The rest stop where it all began is still there, exactly as I remember it. Patricia and I drove past it a few months ago on our way to check on the Carson City project. I pointed it out to her, that concrete bench where I'd sat waiting for people who were never coming back. "Want to stop?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Actually, yeah, I think I do." We pulled into that same parking spot where Garrett's Honda had been 15 years earlier. I walked over to the bench, sat down in the same place where I'd waited and worried, and finally decided to build something new. Patricia sat beside me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that this place used to represent the worst day of my life. But sitting here now, I realize it was actually the best day of my life. The day I stopped waiting for other people to determine my worth and started building it myself." We sat there for a few more minutes, watching the desert stretch out toward the mountains, before getting back in our truck and driving toward home. The home I'd built with the woman I'd chosen, in the life I'd created from nothing but determination, and the kindness of strangers who became family. And for the first time in my adult life, that was completely true. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and redemption, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph over adversity. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up giving us the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover who we really are when we're free to be ourselves.